Yo, what it is, everybody? Thanks for tuning back into another episode here on the Speedbug channel. Bike, car, scooter, it don't matter. We're talking today about something that most people that watch my channel, watch their own damn channel, watch anybody else's channel, it doesn't matter whose channel, any performance or this, that, whatever. I'm gonna give y'all and break off a little piece of insight because everybody wants to know how much horsepower my stuff makes. Well, I'm still not gonna tell you, but this is really about how much and the difference and how much the difference matters to know horsepower versus torque. Horsepower versus torque. Torque is just as important as horsepower, and horsepower is just as important as torque. And in my personal humble opinion, I think torque is a more important number because that is an actual real force. So let's just get right here into the meat and potatoes. So everybody wants to know, it doesn't matter if it's, hell, the Grom, the motorcycles, the cars, you know, how much horsepower does it make? Well, you have to remember, horsepower is a man-made up number. It is a mathematical formula and calculation to determine how long torque is actually being made. Torque is a measurable force by man, and also it's just a measurable force on Earth. Now, torque, whether you measure it in Newton meters, foot pounds, you know, whatever, however you would decide to measure it in your way or area, whatever it is that you want to do, whatever unit, it doesn't really matter. It's still a measurable force. But then how long can you actually create that measurable force? And then you also have to factor in RPM. If something's going around, how long can you keep doing it, and then at what speed? And that will determine, that mathematical formula, your horsepower. So that's a very easy way to kind of describe, you know, a big difference between horsepower and torque. Now, a big thing, now which one is more important? Well, they're both just as important because you can't have one without the other, no matter which way you look at it. Whether it's 1 foot-pound of torque or 1 horsepower, you can't have one without the other, because if you're doing work, the term work, and for the people that understand physics and science and stuff like that, you can't physically have one without the other. If you don't have one, you just ain't doing shit, okay? So when, and a good thing that I always get between my bikes, you know, hey, which one's more powerful? Which one's faster? And stuff like that. Well, then also Newton's 3 laws and stuff come into play. You know, an object in motion stays in motion, so equal or greater force will stop it, and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into all of that. This is definitely not a full physics and history lesson, but it all depends on your application. And I'm not going to go into like gearing and stuff like that you could change with your motorcycles or your cars and stuff like that. But I'm just going to try and cover this broadly. You know, so they say, hey, which bike is more powerful? Which bike is faster? Well, every manufacturer is going to gear their bike different and stuff like that. Hence, my BMW always had a higher top end, gear limited, not talking about power and how much power the bike creates. Gear limited was always a higher top speed than my Suzuki. So let's start there. So the BMW could always reach a higher top speed than the GSXR due to the fact of the RPM that the engine can spin and the gearing that that was dealt from the factory. Now, well, which bike is faster? Well, you have top speed and you have acceleration. Now, going through that RPM band, what creates torque? Doesn't matter if it's in a crotch rocket or a car. Torque, cylinder pressure. Is that bang? How long can you keep that bang for and that cylinder pressure up? And then you get into the higher RPMs, then you need horsepower. And horsepower, and that's going to carry it, and that's that fuel, and that's going to keep going, and that keep going. As cylinder pressure is dropping, torque is dropping, but heat is going up. And to drive that horsepower. And as it keeps going and going, you can make a little bit less cylinder pressure, but you still need more air per second, per cubic centimeter, however it is that you want to measure it. And that's where the volume is going to come in for fuel and other things like that. So a question I really get a lot on the bikes is, well, which one is faster, which one's more fun and stuff like that. Torque is that feeling that you feel in that seat of the pants, that, you know, that rips you off the handlebars when you're in a car. That's what pins you in the seat. Horsepower is what's going to carry you as you're going. Now, a stock Corvette, hell, even a Z06, makes its torque very down low, carries it right away, and then falls off up top. I'm not going to go into the type of superchargers and stuff like that and how it's going to be delivered and stuff like that. Again, depending on your application. And the same thing goes with the motorcycles. If you change your torque curve and make it at the top while the object is already in motion, even though you're creating the same amount of force, it will actually feel slower, but you're going just as fast, if not faster. Always. The Suzuki has always created 20 plus more foot-pounds of torque than my BMW ever did any single day, even modded. But it did create a lot less horsepower. Now down low and through the RPM band, if we would take off, because I built another BMW very similar to mine, down low through the RPM band, this bike would destroy the BMW 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pretty much. But then the BMW made a lot less torque but made more horsepower, and then could come in because an object in motion is easier to keep in motion and is going to require less to continue in that motion until a greater or equal force would stop it. And then horsepower will then carry it, where this bike will then not carry it as well as the BMW, and then the BMW will actually be able to up top accelerate faster. But down low, the Suzuki can accelerate faster. And the same principles are going to go with a car at the drag strip, around a circuit track, and whatever it is that you need to or try to accomplish with whatever objective. So if you need to know more the difference between horsepower and torque and which one is better and which one is faster, it doesn't matter, because you need to have one without the other. You know, it's all about the delivery and how you want to deliver and what your application is. American Muscle, stuff like it, creates a lot of torque, you know, naturally aspirated, supercharged, whatever it may be, where some of the European stuff creates a lot more horsepower and a lot less torque. It's just delivered differently. It doesn't mean that the car is slower, but if you take a car, like let's say like an M3 that creates like 450 horsepower and like 300 foot-pounds of torque, there's no way it's going to win from somewhere down like in a dig on a drag strip or anything like that. But put that car in motion, then it can actually shine. But then you put something that's going to have a lot of torque and you start that car down low, it's going to also really shine. Put that same in that same, you know, or more weight class and put it up top, it's not going to shine as well, or you're going to need a lot more horsepower to keep that object in motion. So just remember, torque is that measurable force. Horsepower is how long you can actually create torque for. Think about it as you're pedaling like a bicycle. And when you're pedaling slow, you can always pedal that thing in like 6th gear, you know, no problem. But as you keep going and you keep that joker in 6th gear, you can't pedal with the same amount of force that you're pedaling at 5 miles an hour as you can pedal at 10. There's your comparison. So hope that clears things up. It doesn't matter how much horsepower, it doesn't matter how much torque. It matters for the application and what it is that you're doing. Whether you're doing quarter mile, 9/10, 2 mile, this, that, whatever. That's where it matters. And then it matters where it's being delivered. Are you delivering in the upper RPM, the middle RPM, or the lower RPM band? All depending on that. And then you can also modify that to your liking just a little bit better to also change mile per hour with gearing. And if you want to know more about that, maybe I can do a segment on that, but that's kind of how the best way on a short video that I can explain the difference between horsepower and torque and how long it actually is created. And that's also another reason why, keep this in mind, that torque is pretty accurate almost on any dyno. Almost for the point. Every maker, obviously, it varies and stuff like that, no big deal. But that torque is that measurable number. But when you go from, let's say, I'm going to even use the same type of dyno. If you're on dyno just, because everyone loves to use dyno just because they like to show higher numbers. But the torque is going to be, if you're on one dyno jet to another dyno jet, it's going to pretty much be almost dead ass accurate. But the horsepower can vary very differently. Not always just due to, you know, the pressure outside and the temperature and this, that. You got to remember, it's a mathematically calculated formula to determine how long that torque is actually being made. Now, supposedly you have, you know, your tach signal hooked up, your dyno's calibrated correctly, but again, it's a tuning tool. Every dyno is calibrated just a little bit different. And Mustang dyno, you know, all of them, it doesn't matter. So that's why you're also going to have a big difference between horsepower and torque, also between dynos. Just always remember, a dyno actually doesn't really mean how much power you're actually making. A dyno is a tuning tool. It's where you start and where you finish. Even if my yellow Corvette here, I know this thing makes over 1,000 horsepower, but it doesn't really matter if it goes on the dyno and says, hey, it made 2 horsepower. Well, if it starts at 2 horsepower and makes 4, then I know it was 100% increase of what it came for before. I'm looking for the delta and everything in between. And the more measurements and increments I have in between, the finer I can tune either the ramp up power or how smooth it comes in or whatever else that I need to do. It's a tuning tool, guys. Remember that. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope that was informative to a lot of you that watch my stuff. And stay easy, guys. I'll see you for another episode here on the Speedbug channel. Deuces.